going to start at 6:30, so we need to get, I'm sure Claire will bring us up to date.
All right, I'm your chair this evening, temporarily. Good evening.
Oh, I guess so.
Let's call the meeting to order. Lizzie will do the roll call.
We're missing our two.
Looks like we're waiting on Committee Member Breeding, Committee Member Cooper,
Here.
Committee Member Larson,
Here.
Committee Member Martin, Committee Member Peterson,
Here.
Committee Member Way.
Here.
Great. All right. Welcome. And it looks like Committee Member Breeding is here. So the next item on the agenda is public comment. This is for members of the public to be able to comment on things that are not already on the agenda. So if someone has an item that they'd like to speak to, they can have 3 minutes here. Please make sure it's an item that's not already on the agenda.
So perhaps you could advise me. I want to speak about including a leaf ordinance in the plan. And since I don't see it anyplace included, I wasn't sure whether I should speak now or wait.
If you want to speak to it as a city policy, you can speak to it now. If you want to speak to it as part of the climate, if you want it to be part of the climate action plan, then you would speak to it then.
Okay, you will take comments from the public then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you for asking.
You do both.
Hi, everyone. I've never been to one of these meetings before, and I just wanted to ask you if any of you have any wisdom for me. I'm beginning to want to participate in greening up my block, trees, whatever, and I know we have an arborist person. It's also my understanding the poor guy is terribly busy, but I thought maybe if you have any comments for me or any advice for me how to get started doing that at any point, that would be terrific. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. We're not allowed to speak to any items that aren't on the agenda, so we can't respond to you directly, but we can connect with you later if you want to provide your contact information.
Just a point on that. If someone sends, it's interesting to bring that up because I have some suggestions on that. So if someone sends an email, and I think our leaf blower person did that to all of us, can we send something back to you that you could send on to the person? Rather than waiting for it to get on agendas and stuff like that. If we have a response, how could we get it back?
You can't make a decision without it being agendized.
Well, I wasn't thinking, I was just thinking of sharing information.
I guess we should talk offline. I'm not quite sure what your question is.
Well, someone just asked what they could do, and I could give them a suggestion.
Oh, specific to this. Sorry, I thought you were talking about leaf blowers.
Yeah.
If you have suggestions for how to get involved, feel free to share those with us, and we can connect you.
Yeah, so if you send, there's a, what is it, it's cac@albanyca.org. Yeah, we're on the website. Just send it in, we can respond.
Is there any other public comment? Okay. Now we move on to announcements. Oh, that's me, student member update. So we have, Samantha thought she was going to be able to come to this meeting, but unfortunately, she's moving tomorrow morning. I think she's already maybe down there. She's moving in tomorrow morning to UCLA. So we're missing her, and we've agendized a resolution of appreciation for her later on in the agenda. And what we've done, we've changed our procedure a little bit for the student member based on some changes in procedure that went to council last December. So we have the MADI Act notification up right now for the student member. If you know any students who might be interested, feel free to share. That's open legally. It has to be open for 2 weeks, and then the Board of the Board of Education will choose a student member at their first meeting in October. So we should have someone starting for your next meeting in October.
I had a question about that.
Yeah.
Would it be kosher for someone from this committee to go to that school board meeting and really advocate for the student member here, and that's a liaison between our two groups?
I don't think that's a question about whether they would do that, because they've always had a representative. So I don't think we have to convince them. Is that what
Well,
you mean?
no, I don't want to convince them. I just want to tell them that they can play a much bigger role in bringing the two groups together. Anyway, I'll talk about that later.
Different topic than
Yeah.
this.
Next, we have a new committee member, Kate Breeding. Would you mind providing a brief introduction to the committee?
Sure. So my name's Kate. I moved to Albany 4 years ago with my husband. I have a background in public health, and I'm interested in the Climate Action Committee because of the public health priorities, urban forestry, and the green building code. So I'm excited to, help curb our carbon footprint in this small town.
Awesome. Thank you. We also have a new Civic Spark Fellow, Bianca Huttner, who just began about a week and a half ago.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Bianca Huttner, excited to be starting here. Coming from the East Coast, so it's exciting to be here and with the town, with the city. So yeah, I'll be helping with community engagement around the climate action and adaptation plan when that gets voted on later. And I have a background in grassroots environmental organizing, so I'm kind of excited to bring that community engagement aspect here.
Great. That's really good.
Thank you. Next, we'll talk about upcoming sustainability events and other sustainability resources or opportunities going on right now. Last Saturday, September 14th, Berkeley hosted a Drive Electric event at their farmers market. We promoted the event via e-news and e-notification. I heard today that they had a great turnout. A lot of people came to show off their cars and talk about tips for driving non-internal combustion engines. So I heard that that was a great event. There are also upcoming SunShares workshops. Registration for SunShares is open through November 15th. We've been promoting it in our e-news, and it's promoted on our website, and we'll be co-hosting a workshop with El Cerrito on October 3rd at El Cerrito City Hall from 6:30 to 8 p.m., and there will be additional workshops and webinar times available by accessing the SunShares website. We have a coastal cleanup day. This Saturday, the 21st, volunteers will meet at the Albany waterfront, and registration details are on the city calendar. Nick will be there to promote carbon-free Albany. If anyone would like to join him, talk to Nick.
It's easy. Just stand there and you try to.
And pass
get
out
people-
stickers.
Yeah, pass out stickers and explain it.
Great. On Wednesday, October 2nd, participating schools will be participating in International Walk and Roll to School Day, which is hosted by Alameda County Safe Routes to School.
October 2nd,
October 2nd, Wednesday, October 2nd.
California Clean Air Day.
Oh, that's not a coincidence. Oh, well, it's international, so it might actually be a coincidence. On October 13th, the Alameda County Household Hazardous Waste Program is sponsoring a one-day drop-off event. Registration is required, and they once you register the event, they will send you a confirmation email with more details, including the location of the event. So if you're interested, register for that, and then you will get the location.
Secret location?
It's not secret.
They say that they won't release the location until.
It's at Golden Gate Fields.
Albany Local Week is September 20th through 28th. The Recreation and Community Services Department will be challenging residents to see how much they can shop, do, eat, and play in Albany during Albany Local Week. Hopefully, I think this will be a great event, and it also touches on a lot of the goals we have in our carbon-free economy section of our CAP, so that'll be exciting. And the Bay Area Air Quality Management District is currently accepting applications for the Clean Cars for All program. They are offering incentives of up to $9,500 for income-qualified residents in certain zip codes, including Albany, and I believe they'll be lifting the zip code restriction by the end of the week. Albany is included regardless. And how it works is if someone is income qualified and they have a car that is model 2004 or older, internal combustion engine, they can turn it in and get incentives for a hybrid, battery electric, plug-in electric, or Clipper card value. We had our Solano stroll, and Claire drove our City of Albany GEM electric vehicle in the parade and towed a solar-powered sound system, and that was a partnership with EBCE. And Nick tabled at the Solano stroll to promote, and Tom
Eric,
and Eric. Wonderful.
We weren't all there at the same time.
Okay, cool.
this was there.
If someone wants to provide an update on how that went, I would love to hear
We
that.
signed up close to 40 people, something like that,
Wow.
our mailing list. Something like that, right? Is that what the?
I didn't,
Yeah, I
I
think
heard
that's what it
someone
was.
say there was pushing 60, but
Oh.
more like 40. But anyway, yeah, we would give a free LED light bulb to people that actually signed up onto the ACAC mailing list. So we're really trying to get more people involved in ACAC from Albany. And it, the Solano stroll is really well attended. It was hard to get people's attention, but I think we got some good information out there, and we were really well located, so.
Yeah, I would say that given that a lot of the strollers were not from Albany, and the kind of lesser signups in the past, to me, it was a big turnout, and it was very encouraging. So I think there's a greater awareness, and there's just more interest, so that was encouraging.
Great, thank you.
I had a question. So this Friday is the big climate action strike. A lot of youth are doing. Is there any, I've been trying to figure out if there's anything happening in Albany around that.
I haven't heard anything. Hopefully Allison has.
Well, specifically at Albany High School, I know there's a forum for people who can't go to the strike itself and still want to like express their support. But that's specifically at Albany High School, not necessarily something that community members at large could participate in. But if
There's
you
a
know
lot
any
of
students
events.
are interested.
Is that what you were asking about?
Yeah, well, I was tracking the website. For a while, there was going to be some banner hanging at the overpass, but then that sort of disappeared. That was being done by the Ecology Center. And the only things I see now is there's a big, sprawl. The UC has one, Richmond has one, I think Oakland has one that starts at Laney, and then there's going to be a big thing at the Federal Building in San Francisco. But again, this is kind of a really significant event, and it seemed like getting a group together would have been a good idea. I was hoping to piggyback on the Berkeley one, but it seems like it's the campus thing now. So I guess if people are going to be encouraged to go somewhere, is that where Albany High kids are going if they strike, or they're just staying home?
Oh, well, Albany High kids, as far as I know, there is a movement to go to the Federal Building in San Francisco.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Okay, next we'll talk our East Bay Community Energy Update. I went to the technical advisory group meeting at Stop Waste yesterday, and JP Ross gave an update. EBCE will be hosting an all-electric new construction webinar on Tuesday, October 1st from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. It's mainly targeted towards developers and design teams, but if anyone's interested in sitting in on that, it might be some interesting information about all-electric new construction. Claire emailed a flyer for that webinar on Monday, but I can send it again if anyone's interested. And also, we just learned we'll be working with EBCE to do a fleet assessment to determine how we can transition some of our fleet vehicles potentially to cleaner fuels or electricity. So that will be coming likely in the first quarter of 2020. That's our EBCE update.
I would like to provide another update. I don't believe we've mentioned that we hired Lizzie Carrad. Did we mention that piece? No, not if it. Oh, so Lizzie is the city's sustainability coordinator. She's in a permanent position here. and she's officially the liaison for this committee. So you'll see me and or Jeff at these meetings moving forward, but Lizzie's your main contact. So
Great, congratulations.
yeah, we're very, very excited to have her on board.
Awesome.
I'm excited to be here.
Also, I'm a terrible chair, and I just skipped right over the minutes. So we're going to move back to that real quick. Approval of minutes from July 17th. Are there any comments on the minutes?
So the one question I had, the discussions we had about the cap, where are those captured?
I wasn't there. But it's from July.
It's just kind of a summary, but I mean the actual comments.
We have a list of the full comments that we have in our folder. We can send those out. We don't typically put all of that information in the minutes, but if you're interested in seeing those, we can share those.
Was that list, that's what was provided to the consultant?
We were the ones who actually, the staff input most of the comments. There were certain comments that we shared, sort of like technical comments or things that needed extra expertise. We shared with our consultants and they did those. But most of the comments from committees, commissions, and the public, we incorporated ourselves. We have a whole spreadsheet. And so we do have a list of your comments. So Tom, are you asking that you want to see those?
No, I was just.
Okay. You want to make sure they're
how the way
captured.
it was represented in the minutes.
Yes. All of your comments were detailed. I took notes at the meeting, and then Lizzie, I believe you went in later and listened to the meeting to make sure that I had captured everything. Does that sound right?
I don't
No.
have any other comments.
No? Okay. Anyway, so yes, we captured everything. Any other comments on the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, any opposed? Okay. Moving on, you're about to have a new chair, right? Oh, wait, this is the minutes. So we don't have any presentations, so we're going to move on to discussion and possible action on matters related to the following items. 6.1, selection of chair and vice chair. So Lizzie sent out the procedure for this. We start with the chair, and you can put nominations on the table and then vote on them.
I nominate Eric Larson.
I second.
Any other nominations you want to put out there? All right. Well, why don't we just go down the line here for a vote? Committee Member Breeding?
Aye.
Committee Member Cooper?
Aye.
Committee Member Larson?
Aye.
Committee Member Martin?
Aye.
Committee Member Peterson?
Aye.
And Committee Member Way?
Aye.
All right. Motion passes. So you have a new chair, which is Eric Larson. Eric, do you want me to do the vote for the vice chair and then we can switch?
Okay.
Okay. Are there any nominations for vice chair?
I nominate Allison.
I'll second that.
All right. Does that sound good to you?
Sure.
All right. Great. So let's go ahead and vote. Committee Member Breeding.
Aye.
Committee Member Cooper.
Aye.
Committee Member Larson, or Chair Larson.
Aye.
Committee Member Martin.
Aye.
Committee Member Peterson.
Aye.
Committee Member Way.
Aye.
All right, and the motion passes. Your vice chair is Allison Martin. Wonderful. So I'm going to hand this over to I'm going to hand this over to Eric now to go on to 6.2.
Okay. Next on the agenda is to pass a resolution for appreciation of Samantha Smithies for her service as the former chairperson. So staff have a resolution?
Yes. So this is a resolution of appreciation to Samantha Smithies for her service on the Climate Action Committee. Whereas Samantha Smithies was appointed by the Board of Education and began her service on the committee in October 2017, and whereas Samantha served as vice chair beginning in February 2018 and as chair beginning in February 2019, And whereas, as an active Albany High School student, Samantha offered invaluable youth perspective and insight to the Committee on Climate Action and Environmental Justice. And whereas, as a youth leader and informed student, Samantha regularly prompted the committee to think creatively about solutions to climate change and about promoting sustainable behavior change. And whereas, as committee chair, Samantha successfully developed meeting agendas and led productive committee discussions. And whereas, during her term of service, Samantha was influential in achieving the city's sustainability goals, including help in shaping the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, promoting opt-ups for East Bay community energy, and developing the Carbon-Free Albany platform. And whereas, Samantha is recognized by the committee for her leadership and ambition, and for her commitment to making Albany a more environmentally responsible city. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the Climate Action Committee does express its appreciation to Samantha Smithies for her service to the city of Albany and wishes her the best in her future endeavors.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to accept the resolution of appreciation.
Does it need a second? I second.
Do I-
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, so the resolution passes.
Pass it around for everyone to sign.
Keep the pen consistent. Yeah.
You have to sign under the chair. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll just pass it back.
Right, great. So next up is the discussion of the draft climate action and adaptation plan. So staff, do you have a presentation for that?
We actually didn't prepare any presentation. We'll just give a brief update about where we are in the process.
Will there be a time for comments from us?
Yes. Yeah. We'll start with a brief update about where we are with the process, and then we can go to committee discussion, public comment. So I think I saw Nick and Eric at our council study session on Monday. We had our consultant, Andrea, from Cascadia Consulting Group, deliver a presentation to the council about the background to the climate action plan, how we designed the climate action plan, where we are now, and also prompted some feedback that we were looking for. We got a lot of positive feedback and suggestions for improvement during the public comment period, but the council decided that they would like to see the climate action plan again to provide more substantial feedback on their end. So our new tentative schedule, we're planning to bring the climate action plan back to council as a continuation of the conversation on October 7th. As a part of their regular agenda. In the meantime, we'll continue incorporating feedback, so we'll have a chance to get more feedback tonight from the Climate Action Committee and from members of the public who would like to speak about the Climate Action Plan, and we will plan to hold off on incorporating those comments into a new draft until we get council feedback. And once we get that council feedback, we'll incorporate all this final stage of comments into our final plan that we will bring to council in late 2019. So,
So when they said they were going to continue it, they're not doing another work session. It'll just be 7:30, they'll have it on the agenda. It sounded like they wanted to have a certain amount of time to bring up their thoughts and discussion.
It'll be on unfinished business on October 7th.
Okay,
Do you know how much time is going to be allotted to that?
They can talk forever when it's on
Oh, okay.
when it's on the regular agenda
Okay.
until they're done.
It's not going to be an earlier workshop, it's just,
Correct. We learned that there's a time constraint for that, so this will give them a little more flexibility.
And just to be clear, so it's the same draft, they got the draft of the plan in advance of the last city council session. And so that's the same draft that they'll have to look through for
Correct. We're not
comments.
going to make modifications between now and then, but we're open to getting your feedback in between now and then.
Yeah.
that's the same version that was in the attachments, right?
Yes, the draft cap with no markups that you received is the same version that they received in their agenda packet, along with the public comments received packet. They also received that. So you have the same materials that they had, plus the markup version. And the markup version, it's a lot to look at, but we wanted to show what we changed since the last meeting that you had from that version of the draft.
So the markup, that shows what was then, what created the current draft that the city council is looking at.
Yeah.
So that's the early version marked up. And,
Yes.
But the version the city council has
Was clean.
incorporates those markups.
Yeah, so the council had the
wanna-
clean version that you also have in your
Yeah,
packet.
yeah. Okay.
Anything else? Is that, okay. So we take public comment, right? Is that the next step?
Yeah, that's the way that council does this. Take public comment first, and then discuss, unless you have specific questions. So if you have questions, you can do them now.
As opposed to comments.
I would kind of like to hear the public comment first, and then we'll, allow everybody else to discuss, because we might want to address what some of the things the public say.
Okay. So we'll open up to the public for comment. Any comments?
Committee, Preston Jordan. Oh, I see there's no laptop here today. Can I hand you a, yeah, thanks.
Is it the same thing that you sent before? It's different? Okay.
I've learned to come with visual aids. So that cap
Wanna direct
CAC, go down and keep going down. That one, there you go, thank you. So just some comments at a higher level. You've talked about this, but I did present and ask the council to move up the carbon neutral date to at least 2045 to match the executive order at the state, which in all likelihood is going to get turned into state law at some point. So as you know, there's 4 strategies. The first 2 strategies, the names now are sort of self-explanatory in terms of indicating to people what it is that we want them to do. So the first one is now activate, share, and electrify transportation. The second one is electrify our buildings. The third and fourth one are a bit more obtuse for people who are not immersed in climate action. So low carbon economy, that might not be evident to people what it is they're supposed to do in that regard. So I suggest renaming that to a phrase that's got, a lot of marketing and a lot of popular understanding now, which is reduce, reuse, recycle. It's not exactly equivalent to low carbon economy. I mean, it's possible to consume different products and have a different carbon footprint, but I think it's at least more understandable and heads in the right direction. As a part of that, a goal or an action under that, the city doesn't really have direct power over very many parts of the economy, but one part of the economy it does have substantial control over is building materials, and in particular, making sure that buildings are seismically retrofit. So the projection is we'll have to throw away about 1/4 of our buildings if a 7.0 earthquake happened on the Hayward Fault tomorrow. And the impact of that in terms of carbon pollution would be tremendous, because you have to replace all those building materials. So basically you take those buildings, you put them in the landfill, you get new materials. So to the extent that we can save those buildings, there's a nexus with a low carbon economy. So I think it would be appropriate to include that in this plan as well. It's in the local hazard mitigation plan, but As I say, there's a commonality between those two. The last strategy is, I think, accelerate resilience, which resilience is, at this point, probably for 95% of the population, 99% of the population, a term of art that they're not necessarily going to understand what that means. So I suggest changing that to reduce climate change hazards, which maybe heads more in the direction of being understandable at face value. And a lot of the goals that are under that strategy are more functional than hazard-oriented, and so maybe hard for people to understand. So it'd be possible to reorganize all the actions under that strategy under goals that are hazard-based. So, mitigate flooding, the actions under that. Mitigate heat island, the actions under that. And so I think that would lead to a structure that's much more understandable to the public and future elected officials, since we're in a democracy and this thing is supposed to last for 10 years. We don't know who's going to be looking at this 10 years down the line. We want it to be understandable for them. I did bring up Western Forge and Flange again, that it's unconscionable to keep those emissions in the baseline when a single entity takes 5% of Albany's emissions away, and this body I know has already voted that it should be removed, but I'm just going to reiterate that. And then on the context side, motivation, which is sort of the first half of the document, I wanted to provide some input on including information about historic temperature change so that people know where we're at. So I'm sorry, I have to ask you to advance the slide because I can't do it myself, if you would. So the plan says the temperatures are projected to increase 2 to 4 degrees throughout the city mid-century, with daily maximum temperatures increasing by up to 9 degrees. I couldn't tell if this was relative to a pre-industrial baseline, if this is relative to where we are in 2020. But if you go to the next slide, this is the oldest record in the area is from the Berkeley Weather Station, and so this is average daily temperatures on an annual basis. So it goes back, the record goes back to 1890. And you can see the trend lines there. So starting in about 1990, the heating really took off. If you go to the next slide. So there's been about 3 degrees of warming already. So again, relevant to that 2 to 4 degrees, it would be good to clarify in the plan, number one, is that relative to pre-industrial? And if it is, it's already happened. Even if it is relative to today, I think it would be instructive and motivating people to include a graph like this showing we've already gone up 3 degrees. This isn't a problem in the future. This is a problem that's happening now and is not showing signs of abating. If you go to the next slide, please. And the graph on the right is the average maximum daily temperature per year, again with the trend lines. And next slide. And so from 1890, it's already gone up 5.5 degrees. And if you go to the next slide.
What was the second slide again?
So this second graph is, so if you see the statement at the top, they have both average temperatures overall and then maximum temperatures. So the second graph is taking the maximum temperature for each day from the Berkeley Weather Station, averaging that during the year. So what we're seeing is a lot more warming in our daytime temperatures than we are in our nighttime temperatures. Actually, the nighttime temperatures have been increasing, but they haven't had that kink, that acceleration in warming, which is interesting to contemplate why. I don't know why that is. I have some ideas, but I'm not going to put those out there here. But the daytime temperatures have gone up dramatically. The papers I've seen is that's probably because of a fog switch or a marine layer switch. So we're much more subject to warming on the coast than they are inland, because if we have overcast, we have the marine layer, or we don't, is a binary mode. And when we don't have it, then we're 10 degrees hotter than when we do have it. And that layer is evaporating closer and closer to the coast as warming occurs. And people who've lived here, people who grew up in Albany, if you talk to them, they say, half the summer they couldn't even see the end of their block because there was so much fog, ground level fog, and now that's very rare. I've even seen it I moved into the area in the 1980s, and I've seen it decrease dramatically in that time, the amount of fog that we have. So again, I think something like this is motivating in terms of context, and also to tie into this statement above that's in there already. If you go to the next slide. This is a graph, I think it's figure 7, if I recall correctly, If you go to the next slide, this is the number of days above 90 degrees in our area, I guess. I don't know how specific it is to our area, but it says that the historical average is less than 1 day a year over 90 degrees. Well, clearly that doesn't seem right. I mean, we had 2 or 3 days over 90 degrees just last week.
Preston, can I stop you and clarify? This is a mistake that we brought up to our consultants, but there was not enough time for them to do the research to fix it. So we are.
Okay.
They know and they're aware.
Okay, great. Well, then just jump to the next slide. So looking again at the Berkeley weather station data, the red line is a 10-year rolling average or moving average, and the maroon or darker line, red line, is the number of days over 90 degrees per year. So you can see, we've got, well, if you go to the next slide, the peak in 2015 was 12 days over 90 degrees. And if you go to the next slide, the 10-year average at this point is 6 days over 90 degrees. We're already experiencing these heat events here. So I'm happy to hear they're gonna work on that. If you go to the next slide. And so that was kind of it for the context. For some specific ideas on adjustments to actions. Action 1.1.2 regards prioritizing low-stress cycling routes. And I think it should mention motorist-separated cycling routes, so it's very clear. I mean, there's a huge body of research that's broad consensus now that motorist-separated cycling infrastructure is what gets people biking. That's what really makes the huge difference. I'm worried that low stress is going to be such a subjective term that it's open to interpretation and fudging over time by future administrations in the city. Action 1.1.6 regards a public transit gap analysis. Either that action or another action should mention support for bus rapid transit on San Pablo. That's something that the County Transportation Agency is pursuing right now. Action 2.2.6 regards increasing the utility user tax in order to provide a revenue stream for electrifying existing buildings. It would be best if it also mentioned the restructuring the existing utility user taxes, just to put that in bounds, because that can also provide economic motivation to make the change to all electric heating. And incidentally, Luke Nickerman, who's a Albany resident, but in his capacity as an employee of PG&E's electrification group, has set up a call for myself and a Berkeley Energy Commissioner to talk to PG&E billing and electrification personnel about making this change to their billing system this Friday. So that's exciting. That's moving forward. Action 4.1.1 regards tree cover, and I think it would be useful to mention using city property or maximizing the use of city property for tree cover. So I brought up before, there's pretty large swaths along various streets that could be, the sidewalk over time could be moved to the edge of the city's property, and that would open up more space for trees along our streets. Some of the streets now only have 1.5 feet. Like on Portland, there's only 1.5 feet wide to put a tree in, which is not really tenable for getting a tree of sufficient size to change the temperature in the city. And finally, action 4.2.6 includes cool roofs and cool pavement, but the action itself regards green infrastructure. And to my knowledge, and I'm not deeply embedded in this, I don't tend to think of cool roofs and cool pavement as green infrastructure. Green infrastructure is usually has something to do with vegetation. So I think that could be separated out as its own action to pursue. And the issues with cool pavement and cool roofs in terms of implementation are quite different than the issues with green infrastructure implementation. Thank you very much.
Preston, would you mind sending us this with including your data sources for the heat days?
Sure. Yeah,
Wonderful.
absolutely.
Thank you.
You can take a copy right now, or is it easier if I send it to you?
It's easier if you send
Okay, happy to do it. Thank you.
I'm going to quickly make a request. If you come up for public comment, just make sure to say your name so I can write it down.
Hi, so my name is Carol Fitzgerald. I live right around the corner on Madison Street and have for 40-some years. So up until this summer, leaf blowers hadn't really affected me because we had this wonderful gardener who was a retired gardener from the Oakland Rose Garden. So he did everything by hand. He passed away in his 90s. And so our manager now has hired a professional gardening group, as have the neighbors next to where I live. So they invaded their first time there, 3 leaf blowers all over the place. And so mainly we have shrubs and leaves. We don't have any green grass there. So I mentioned to the owner that we didn't had, in all the years I'd lived there, we never used a leaf blower, and she wants it to be there because they're professional, and she's kind of into it, that it's her thing. So I took pictures and showed her that all they were doing is leaf blowing them into the gutter and leaving them. So she did talk to them, and the next time they came, they still use the gas-powered leaf blower, but they do get rid of it. They don't leave it in the gutter anymore. They get it all together and then sweep it up and put it in our green plan. So that is an improvement. The next door neighbors do not, so it's all over their gardener. So anyway, I spoke to Mayor Nason earlier in August about this, and she was surprised it's never came through because she, was part of the Save Lake Tahoe, and they banned gas power way back in the 90s. So, and then at the Tuesday night out, Councilmember Pilch was at our block. And so he gave me, or sent to me, when this committee was a sustainability committee in 2014 that you did there. I do have the staff report of a proposed leaf ordinance. And in it, there's several steps, several suggestions that I don't know if you've done anything about them, apparently not. So I wanted you to reconsider looking at that and including it. And I think that Mayor Nason wants to, she mentioned that she'd like to, in December, include it in the next strategic plan because she feels strongly, at least about banning the gas power. And she sent me the California Air Resources Board fact sheet from, I guess, this year. And they talk about the emissions are significant from the gas-powered mowers and blowers. And that it mentions here that in 2020, that particular board will consider new standards for small engines to help California meet its goal of reducing smog forming, pollutant emissions, and there will be significant emission reductions will be achieved through a combination of regulatory and incentive approaches and a major shift to zero emissions. So it looks like they're going to be tightening up. And so I thought you all might want to revisit the ordinance if you haven't and see what we can do. At least I would like to see us get rid of leaf blowers in general for all of the other reasons, but at the very least that we get rid of the gas-powered ones. And do you want the fact sheet by any chance from the California Board of Resources that mentions things, or I can email it to everybody? What's your pleasure?
Whichever you prefer.
I'll email it to everybody. It'll be easier. Thank you.
Thanks.
I have a question real quick. I noticed that I got a couple of emails. Neither person from whom I received emails was you, as far as I can tell. Is there like a community movement to?
Well, I posted in the end of July in Nextdoor, does this bother anybody else? And for about 2 weeks, there was quite a bit of thread, and it's still on. I think there were probably around 24 people that commented, mostly against them, but it was a pretty good thread. There were only a couple of rants. Most of it was very sincere. And so I did post Monday that this meeting was happening, and that I was going to come speak to it. So you may have gotten some, and of course I included that they could email if they couldn't make the meeting.
Oh.
And so that's probably why you got a couple of, but they're not people that I personally know, but I certainly was doing a little organization, which I'm not afraid to do. Thank you.
Of course, yeah. One of the emails has pictures of leaf blowers.
Yeah, I think she sent me one too. It was the work at the Goodwill. Was that the one?
Yes.
Yeah, she sent me that copy too.
Good evening, Ian McLeod, Planning and Zoning Commission, but here on my own behalf. I think today should be a day of moral outrage as the federal administration tries to ban California from our own mileage standards. I think this should be a big day of pushback. I can remember when I was a kid visiting my grandparents in Los Angeles, and you couldn't see anything because of the smog. And we have gotten better because of these standards. So, we've got to keep up the pressure and keep doing what we're doing, and I commend all of you for your service. And, got a lot to do, and it's an important fight. I'd like to just agree with the previous commenter. I've also seen city maintenance workers using gas-powered weed whackers, blowers. I think they should all be required to be battery-powered. Mowers, there is at some point a capacity where you can't mow a playing field with a battery-powered mower at this point, but maybe that will happen. But any smaller ones should all be battery-powered. It's a public health issue. It's a smog issue. For the people using the equipment, it's particularly dangerous because that emission source is literally about a foot from their face, so they are taking the brunt of it. So it's actually protecting workers to adopt this kind of thing. So I would really encourage that to be part of the climate action plan. So back to the draft plan. If you could you bring up the draft plan to the first section with electrification? I had a few comments, and then mostly let's see. Well, I guess the electrification section second section, sorry. Could you go down a little bit? Yeah, right there. That's good to start. I'm just frustrated that we can't adopt a gas ban for new construction quicker. I mean, I don't know how we can make it go faster. It would be ideal to have this in place by the next code cycle, which starts in January 2020. So then new codes are in alignment. Developers, architects, builders will know what to expect. They don't have to expect some mid-code shift. There are lots of projects that come along and that come before my commission, and at the moment, all I can really do is encourage them. It's literally just encouragement. I can't say follow this regulation. That would be the best thing for our climate action. We did get some agreement by a townhouse project on Keynes that they would go all electric, new construction. Not for any altruistic reasons, but because of the expense of putting 9 gas meters and trenching through the street would be a considerable expense. So in a lot of ways, new construction, if there are no services, no electrical, or no facilities for gas already, then it's a no-brainer. You don't do it. You save a lot of money, and you put all that money into your electrical equipment. The only way we're going to solve climate change is to stop burning fossil fuels. So the sooner we get this into place, the better. So I don't know how we accelerate this process. I mean, if we have to wait for the council to approve this draft, and then we go from there, and then it's like consultants, and more back and forth, Climate Action Committee, Council, it could take a year. Berkeley did it relatively quickly. They have all the regulations in place. I mean, it's like copy and paste at this point. They would be happy to let us pretty much copy what they've done, and they've said so. So I think we need to do something to accelerate it. Because once the gas meters and gas lines are in place, I mean, you cannot replace that with the renewable resource. If it's all electric and they're getting some of their power from a non-renewable resource, that can eventually shift over much more easily. So the sooner we do it, the better. I had a comment about, there's a statement in here somewhere that says electrical appliances are more expensive than gas appliances, and it's not true. So I think that should be changed or stricken from your draft. The high-end gas appliances are as expensive or more expensive than some of the electrical ones. And if you factor into the energy savings factor that you get with induction cooking or with heat pump water heaters, you're actually saving money over time. So in fact, the statement should be that electrical appliances and equipment is cheaper than gas appliances when you factor in usage over time, especially with the heat pump technology that's currently in use. You get an energy factor of 1.3, something like that. It's quite phenomenal. It's almost like magic, but it works.
Real quick, what you're saying, it's in the second paragraph of the strategy 2 overview.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think it should be amended or changed. So if you look at the next, let's see, 222, a lot of this equipment, heat pump, water heaters, any electrician and plumber can install them. It's not like we have this big barrier to adoption because the workforce can't do it. There are some more complicated systems for multifamily or large commercial buildings that do need highly technically trained installers. But for your average homeowner, heat pump water heaters are very, very simple. It's not like there's a barrier there. So I'm not even sure you need to do so much with, working with local contractors. And once regulations are in place where buildings will be all electric, they will learn in a heartbeat how to do it. It's pretty easy. I can guarantee you I'm a general contractor, and I've had my regular plumber and my regular electrician install these things. So it's easy. What else? I just think we've got to do it fast. So then I just had some other thoughts about transportation. And one of those is the exact thing that Preston brought up with the bike facilities. And if you're using low stress, could you find that one where it says low stress, please?
I'm not our transportation planner, but we talked quite a bit about low stress.
It's 1.12.
1.1, yeah. there it is.
Prioritize low stress facilities to encourage increased ridership.
Well-
My understanding was that's the term across the board. That's what Alameda County Transportation
Well-
Commission uses, and so that's why, just to give you context, that's why it's
Well,
here.
for example, I've been looking at the Alameda County Transportation Commission's planning efforts, and that would be including potentially protected bike lanes along San Pablo, and they go out of their way to say it won't be a low-stress facility. So if you're saying low stress, you're almost playing into anti-bicycle people's hands, because it's not going to be a low-stress facility. So you're going to be saying, let's do low stress. There's going to be protected bike lanes proposed on San Pablo, and they're going to say they're not low stress. So I think you've got to be very, very careful with this. And I think it actually should be much more specific and much more explicit. And it should be that we should have protected bicycle lanes on all major streets. Simple as that. And low-stress facilities on a adjacent, parallel streets, or other minor streets. Because part of the argument against protected bicycle facilities is that, oh, we have low-stress facilities on parallel streets, therefore we don't need protected bike lanes on major streets. And if we're going to make a shift, a modal shift to bike transportation, we have got to create a continuous and complete network of protected bike lanes through our city that connects to the same thing in all our adjacent cities. If you get on a bike path and you don't have anywhere to go, it's not very effective. It's got to be continuous and complete. So when you look at Albany, what are our major streets? San Pablo, Solano, Marin. The mayor the other night asked, why aren't there more bicyclists on Marin? And I can tell you why, because you're in a bike lane, except for the protected part, you're in a bike lane where cars are zipping by at 35 miles an hour, and you're next to car doors. Right there, people get scared, and they're not going to use it very much. I've almost been hit twice on Marin. I was right hooked twice. I came within like that far of hitting cars. And they yelled at me. You know, it's like, one guy told me to slow down. So I think it needs to be very explicit. And I think you have to understand the strategy for getting people out of their cars and onto bikes. And it's protected bike lanes and a complete network. And when you look at Albany, you have San Pablo and Solano that basically bisect the city, and there are no bike facilities on those streets. So how can you have a bike network where the two main bisecting streets don't have bike facilities? So I think you need to really be careful with this low stress, because now we're proposing, or there's going to be a pilot project on Keynes and Adams that are going to be low stress, apparently. And that can be used as an excuse not to do facilities on San Pablo. So I think you have to be very, very careful. And I would be very explicit and just say protected bike lanes on all major streets. And this also dovetails with planning efforts to increase density, because part of our mandate right now is to increase density all over California, and specifically in Albany, along the San Pablo corridor and on Keynes and Adams, R3. So if you're going to do transit-oriented development, and you want those people that come into these new housing projects to use other modes of transportation, you have to have bike facilities right outside their door. If they don't, what are they going to do? They're not going to use their bikes as much. And we want to connect this whole corridor, and we need to change our housing parking requirements, reduce car parking, and increase the size of bike rooms. So that's the way we're going to get a modal shift. So I think you need to have something in there about all of that. You know, it does us no good if we build big housing projects and everybody still needs to get in a car. So we are such a great city for cycling. It's a great region for cycling. You know, with not that much effort, we could have cycling paths that connect Oakland to Pinole, you know, perpendicular access all over the place. You can get to BART, get on BART, go to another station, get out, ride somewhere else in the whole Bay Area. I mean, it could be a really phenomenal network. That's probably enough of your time for tonight, so thank you very much for your patience. All right.
Thanks. Any other? Yeah?
So when you referred to, was this an organized group? I hope that doesn't discourage you or make it, that would be the reason whether you would take up the ordinance for leaf blowers if there's not an organized group.
Oh.
I'm not
No, I was
quite
just wondering
sure
where the
what
emails were coming from.
Pardon me?
Just wondering where the emails
Well,
were coming from.
yeah, okay, but I also noticed in the public comment on the online survey that you had, there was quite an extensive comment by a person who, I don't know whether he was a doctor or what, but you can look back, and he was not somebody I know, but he was an Albany resident that said he could contribute a lot of professional reasons for leaf blowing. So you might look back and see who that is. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Any other comments from the public? Thanks very much.
So, Claire, we're not really sanctioned to comment on the comments, right? Because it's not part of the agenda. Is that correct?
You
can
can
do
you
it.
can discuss comments because their comments were related to an item on the agenda.
Okay. Yeah, I just had a couple of follow-up comments. Thank you for all the public input. That was great input.
I want to clarify you shouldn't do back and forth, but if you want to make comments on the comments, you can.
Okay. Okay. So just in one comment on the 3 degrees Fahrenheit, if I understood the plot right, and just to clarify that 3 degrees Fahrenheit is 1.7 C. So that means that we have already exceeded the 1.5 C goal, at least locally. So that's one comment. And then in terms of the leaf blower ordinance, it's true, we had a lot of discussion of that. I think this may be of interest also to our new member, our public health expert, Kate, but there was a lot of discussion of that. And as I recall, I don't recall all the details, but as I recall, we did make a recommendation to the city gardeners. And I believe the response was that it would be too labor intensive because it's a labor saving device, and there was pushback. So it didn't get too far, but I may be misremembering.
No,
But the other,
Right. That was the response from staff,
Yeah.
and
okay,
we were also told that we couldn't pass a ban on private use.
it's hard to
blowers.
enforce also,
Yeah.
right? So
So that's why I never
that was
mind.
one comment. And then the other comment, which may have been stated by the member of the public, is that gas leaf blowers are bad, yes, but electric leaf blowers are also bad in the sense that they just blow up a lot of dust, and that could be allergens, but it also could be more seriously PM 2.5, and that can just contribute to poor respiratory health, especially depending on where you are. If you're very close to the freeway, this just compounds the problem. Or if you're very young, or very old, it's very damaging. So, so it's a good input, and it's just important for us to keep this issue in mind. But again, I think we took it up for a long time, actually, with Robert Urhammer being the champion for about 3 years, I think, and we did, it's a tough one to get much traction on.
So just a point of clarification, we're going to have a discussion up here, and we can't do a back and forth with the audience, sorry. So we should just clarify
The
that.
other comment I'd like to make in response to one of the comments from the public about the electrification ordinance, that is something we are working on. So that's not something that we have to wait on the cap or to put in the cap for new construction. So that's being worked on, and we're planning on bringing something to the committee either at the next meeting or the one after, right? That's the plan. So doesn't necessarily have to be in the cap. I also had some comments about the draft. So how did you want to accomplish that?
I have a comment about the public comment before you say that. So Ian McLeod mentioned the protected bike lanes on all major streets, and he brought up Solano, San Pablo, and Marin. I probably sound like a broken record here, but I think that like areas such as like Portland and other big routes to the high school and possibly the middle school, like Buchanan maybe, should also be considered for protected bike lanes, because we have 1,200 people getting to one building every single morning for 180 days. And there are traffic jams, and there's a lot of cars going, and we're a 1 mile square city, and I know a lot of people walk, and some people bike, but a lot of people do drive. And personally, I bike to school every single day, and I've gotten hit completely head on by someone opening their car door in front of me as I was navigating the way up Portland and narrowly swerved to avoid that again about a week ago. So now I just ride on the sidewalk for that part, which is equally dangerous, especially to pedestrians. But yeah, I think we should, when considering the main streets in Albany, we should definitely consider people making their way to the schools.
I'd like to make a suggestion. Maybe we just go down the line and just make our comments that we have, and we could incorporate comments. Would that be okay?
Yep, okay.
Yeah.
No comments at this time.
Okay. So 1.16. What's missing from this, and I thought this was part of our discussion at the July meeting, is there's no mention about the school district and the impact of traffic in the city that the school district is part of. I mean, to your point, I mean that this is one of the problems in the city is with the internal transportation. And so I think that that's a glaring omission, that even though the city doesn't have the authority over the school district, we do have authority over the transportation within the city. And so I think it needs to be addressed in here in some manner, that the impact of transportation to the high school, to all the schools in the city, and how do we get people out of their cars? How do we make it safe for students to bike to school or walk to school?
We did try to address that explicitly based on your comments. Identify opportunities for additional routes to accommodate all users. We included commercial corridors and areas of the city underserved by public transit, which got to the point where you wanted to focus on the western part of the city in particular.
Yeah, right.
Is there other language that you'd like to suggest for this measure beyond that?
I think it should specifically mention the schools, because that is the source of a lot of the internal transportation within the city. People driving their kids to school.
I mean, we could include that in a gap study, perhaps. My concern is we'll get a lot of pushback at the council level because we're not responsible for getting kids to school, and there's been a lot of issues about that, particularly related to the Ocean View construction project. And so I'm concerned that council will be concerned that it might set a precedent suggesting that the city would be responsible for busing kids to school.
No, I'm not suggesting that. What I'm saying that how do you do a study of the issues of transportation in the city and not address the impact that transportation to and from schools have on it? That's the gap in the gap study, the gap analysis to me. Okay. So I think it needs to be included. It doesn't necessarily mean the city is responsible for getting the school district to address it. It's all our problem. So I think it needs to be in the cap as something that's addressed. The other thing is, in general, I thought that several items that are listed as midterm should be near term. Waiting not up to 9 years for a gap analysis of the transportation issues. Why would we do that? I mean, why can't that be done in the near term in the next 3 years? Same thing, I think, is true for 1.19, which addresses the density issue in the city. Why do we need to wait so long to develop a program? It seems like the kind of thing that we should be able to do within 3 years, not do the 4 to 9 years. I also picked up on this thing about the basically in 2.1.1, talking about the costs of conversion. I think that's not true for appliances. I don't think that's the case anymore. It is likely the case for home heating, but not for, heat pump water heaters are more expensive, but that's probably the only area. So I think most people don't think of their water heater as an appliance. They're thinking about a dryer and a stove, and those are now more expensive than gas. So I think it sends the wrong message. The 2.2.5, this is the outreach and incentive program. Again, why is that a midterm action? This is something that we have the information, we should be doing this, and why do we need to wait, why is this a midterm thing? I think this should be a near term.
Real quick, I see up there that it was actually switched from near to mid. Do we have any idea why that decision was made?
Yes. Let me go up here to our critical path. Where is it? This. So we're looking at doing building electrification in phases, and let me see if I can make this bigger. So phase 1 is eliminating natural gas from new construction. Phase 2 is incentivizing electrification of existing buildings. I want to mention in phase 1, there's also outreach. Phase 2 is incentivizing because incentives take a lot of time to develop. So we're not going to do that overnight. And then phase 3 is eliminating natural gas from existing buildings. So that was the sort of trajectory. So that's why the timeline was changed. I don't know if there was public comment on that piece or if it was just based on this.
Just seems like something that we could do. I mean, we have the information. Why would we wait?
I think if we have any, any incentives that we learn of that are available, we would obviously share immediately. We wouldn't wait 3 years to share that. But I think if we're developing our own programs, that might take a little bit more time than sharing resources that are already available.
It would require adoption of a UUT amendment through, voter approved ballot measure. These things, those kinds of things take time.
Okay. So I had a similar comment on 2.2.9, the ordinance requiring individual meters for multifamily construction. That seems like something that could be done near term since we're evaluating the green building standards. Okay, 4.1.1, create a comprehensive tree master plan. I don't see an implementation associated with this or a actual target. So it's just, the concern is we develop a plan and then it's just a plan.
Yeah, we could say create and implement a comprehensive tree master plan. Would that?
This says create a comprehensive tree plan, tree master plan.
Use it create and implement a comprehensive tree master plan. Would that do the trick?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Just add implement in there
Yeah,
so that
there
we hold
needs
ourselves to
be
it?
Implement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any chance, I know that there have been community movements in the past to get new street trees in Albany. That's how our house got a street tree in front of it and most of the street trees on our block. I live on Adams. And is there any possibility that the city as a whole in creating and implementing a street tree plan would recruit people from organizations like those who have previously gotten trees on streets in Albany?
Yeah, I mean, I think the street tree master plan would involve a lot of community engagement and stakeholder engagement in terms of determining the priorities for the plan and developing the plan, and then certainly on the implementation side of the plan, there's probably a lot of opportunity for volunteer work as well.
Okay, the next one I had was 4.2.6, address barriers to green infrastructure and resilience improvement on private property. I didn't really understand what this was. I mean, I understand the concept, but I don't understand how this is described in the CAP, how that leads us to any actions. I mean, what does this really mean? Does this mean reducing the permit fees? Does it mean incentivizing people in some way? It's vague.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of interest in green roofs and a lot of public comment, and Lizzie, you can speak to this a little bit, but a lot of public comment about people wanting to be able to construct green roofs, but we don't actually see any barriers to that. And so this was a way to address those comments. And certainly if people see barriers, we'll address them.
I don't see the point in putting something in the CAP to address public comments. If that's what, we should have some kind of a, the CAP needs to be connected to action. And if we don't have a barrier that we're trying to address, why do we have something like this? There's nothing stopping somebody from putting a cool roof on their house. In fact, they should if they can do that. So either I would suggest this be modified to make it meaningful that there's some connection to a strategy or an action. Otherwise, why put something in here that doesn't?
Yeah, I guess I misinterpreted. I thought this was trying to promote green infrastructure on private property, which city hasn't really, we can't force people to do it, but that we would look at promoting it.
Yeah, I think we could say address, or I think we could say promote green infrastructure and resilience improvements on private property. We probably won't promote green roofs for a variety of reasons, because there are some concerns in our community development department about them.
Residential or commercial?
Residential. So
It sounds like opening it to promote would help open, it's still a little vague, but at least it gives us the mandate that we can do something there, and then we can.
yeah, and we should promote
In the future, so.
cool roofs and cool pavement. Yeah, promote and educate, or some sort of education and outreach piece. And then the question is, does that fit in some of the other items? See, there's like a promote use of climate adaptive plants. Is that a separate item? I don't know. We'll look into it.
Okay, I'm almost done. 4.3.4, partner regionally to promote water conservation. So this is something we have talked about since the inception of this committee. The fact that there's purple pipe along the bay that we're not connected to. So I would say CAP is an opportunity to be specific about connecting into the gray water system that it exists, and to lobby regional governments to complete the infrastructure.
Yeah, I agree completely. The feedback I've gotten is that that's not going to happen in the next 30 years. That's what the feedback we've gotten from East Bay Mud. And so I think we can put it in here.
I mean, that you could say that about anything in here.
I mean,
I would not accept that from East Bay Mud. I mean, we're the customers, right? So I think it's something that we should be pushing for, because this is ridiculous that it's been going on for.
Yeah, and we have done it in the past, and we can continue to.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what this.
Yeah. Do you want to keep that in this measure? Or do you want a separate action?
I think it can be part of this. I mean, otherwise this doesn't really mean anything. It's right. It's not. There is an opportunity here that we should be focused on, just like all these actions. Something
think-
specific.
I think this is really key too, because, I mean, like other utilities, this fast coming up climate change thing is really, PG&E is reeling around it. They don't know what they're doing. They're declaring bankruptcy, right? And EBMUD's in the same boat. So at some point we may have where, we plant these trees, but there won't be enough rainfall to sustain them. So it'd be nice to have recycled water to keep the tree cover. So, I mean, these are all things that are going to really fit into our resilience. And we can't wait 30 years for EBMUD to wake up and have their board of directors do it. So we should lobby. I think it needs to be in there as a lobbying point. Yeah.
And for those who are new to the issue, the city of Albany has put in a lot of purple pipe for recycled water, but East Bay Mud doesn't. There's a connection missing between Emeryville and Berkeley, and so we can't access the recycled water even though we've laid the pipe. So.
Well, that's we need to partner with Emeryville and Berkeley then. So, yeah. Okay.
I'm done.
I decided just do my chair thing, and just as a point of process, we got about 40 minutes left. I want to make sure we get all the way back down to max. So I'm thinking that let's not try to debate a particular item too much. I mean, certainly discussion's good, but just in terms of this is our one chance to give some sort of discussion and feedback. So let's go ahead and give the feedback and maybe try discussion that's good, but let's try not to solve everything as we go along. So. So I sent my comments to staff already, but I'll just touch on the highlights, and so I appreciate the response already, so that was cool. So I suggested that we get the Climate Action Committee's proposal for the revised targets, like Preston or Ian, I can't remember which one of you said, Preston, right? Yeah. Right. And that was taken into account, and the city council will have to decide on whether to adopt those new standards or not. So, but I thought it would be, at least, bring it up to try to get it into the plan. Let's see. Oh yeah. So on the curve that shows the forecast with Albany and where it tails off and it's still well above the carbon zero. I thought that needed a little bit more explanation about how that's the California policies that are in place today that don't get us to the end point that we need, and that's really the point of that graph. And so I thought that the text in there should bring that out a little bit more strongly. The consumption-based what's it called? Consumption-based inventory. I wasn't really that well versed in it coming into this, and all of a sudden I saw this humongous circle that was consumption-based, and I was a little confused by what was being said there. So I just asked for the consultant to give a little bit more information about how to interpret that graphic is what I was looking for, because I'm used to looking at the traditional ones that we've been looking at. So.
Yeah, I think the main takeaway from that graphic is it's showing that the emissions that occur within Albany are in that little blue bubble, and then the emissions that are tied to all the things we consume, like our clothing, our food, our air travel, our other travel, that occur outside of our boundaries but are made by people that are within our boundaries, are also a part of that consumption-based inventory that we're considering. And that's why a lot of our carbon-free economy section actions are like promoting behaviors that maybe won't directly reduce emissions here within our boundaries, but will reduce emissions globally. But if you have suggestions for specific language I should use to clarify that so it's more easily understood, please send them my way. Yeah.
I'm gonna look at that again. I found that the stuff about the sea level rise and focusing, there was a little spotlight on the neck and the bulb. And while that's a nice graphic to really show sea level rise, I was a little afraid that Albany residents are going to look at it and say, well, I don't really care about the bulb. It can go underwater for all I care. And that that would sort of be the inverse of what we want. So I was thinking if there's some data about what would happen to I-80 or the exits or something like that that's a little bit more impactful, that might be a better sea level rise graphic. Nick made this comment at the city council, which I thought was awesome, and I made it as well, to add a full-time staff person to the Climate Action Committee to focus on the implementation activities going forward on this. And so I think that that is something that I would love to see added to the Climate Action Plan or the implementation plan. And you said that we've got a full-time Civic Spark person, yeah, so that's great. So we'll hopefully put you to a lot of work.
Looking forward to it.
I find the carbon neutrality, I've yet to see a really good definition of how to easily understand that concept. I mean, it's kind of like what we always talk about, but for the layperson, I find it hard to, I've tried to describe it to people, and the consultant tried to describe it in the city council, and it still doesn't quite come through really clearly to the average person. So I was struggling a little bit more for maybe a little bit better definition of carbon neutrality. Since it's such a crux of understanding that, the need for this climate action plan. And the connecting with landlords, contractors, there's a lot of good stuff in the climate action plan now. I was looking for something a little bit more specific about how to incentivize landlords to get on board. And incentivization really came clear. I was in the focus group with the landlords, and they are clearly a group. It's 50% of our population in Albany is renters, and incentivizing them is really difficult to get on board. I mean, they're just so practical dollars and cents. So I'm open to ideas, but anyway. And lastly,
We're open to suggestions on that from anyone too. We're scratching our heads.
Lastly, in the city council meeting, somebody made a comment about not having seen anything about PV solar in the climate action plan. And I'm sort of at two minds of that. I know that with East Bay Community Energy, we've sort of tackled the renewable supply in one big fell swoop. And so that's really reduced in its need for implementation on the personal level. And so it's good to be able to focus on, okay, now how do we electrify everything? How do we get electric vehicles and all that? But then again, personally, I find it a very good investment for myself, solar panels and an electric car. So it feels like maybe the consultant could deal with that topic and maybe say, how could we think about, individual PV? Maybe just a spotlight item or something like that in the plan.
Oh, as opposed to, because it is mentioned in some of our actions.
But kind of the topic of how to think about, whether I should invest personally or whether I should take that money that I would have spent on solar panels and get an induction stove and a heat pump instead. Which is the better for the climate and for me individually.
Okay, cool.
Induction, sorry. What did I say? Infection? Sorry. All right.
Okay, so I have one very small comment for now, a typo. That's what I have. And again, like what was brought up earlier about like including more of the school districts in the climate action plan. I know we don't have jurisdiction over the school, like AUSD itself, but as a student, I recognize that the schools are a very large part of Albany as a whole, and it seems strange for me. It's strange to me that the climate action, that the CAP doesn't necessarily like specifically talk about what we're going to do with the schools or what we're going to encourage the schools to do, or what we're going to do even like around the schools. Maybe to as like bike path on Portland to mitigate the carbon footprint of people trying to get to school, not necessarily working with AUSD on that specifically, if that's possible. And then also on page 33, the graph wasn't very clear as far as I could tell. I forget if this was page 33 of the red marked up one or page 33 of the not red marked up one. It was the red marked up one. Okay. Page 33 of the modified with the red cross out things. right. Okay, prioritization of emission sectors. How should the Albany City government prioritize the following efforts to minimize community greenhouse gas emissions? How should individuals prioritize the following efforts to minimize their impact on community-wide greenhouse gas emissions? So if these are the questions, what were the options for people's answers? Because I just see percentage signs, and is that people's, like, what they thought was the first priority, or like so that's first priority?
Yeah, so this came up at our council meeting. I think we realized that it was a very confusing graphic. So we'll plan to change that up. But basically, what I was trying to go for here was from the initial survey, asking people, how they prioritized actions that individuals should focus on to reduce their own emissions versus sectors that the city government should focus on to reduce overall emissions. And the percentages are, how many people chose it as their first choice. Okay. Yeah, it's been a while since I created that graph, but I recognize now that it's kind of confusing, so I'll modify that.
Great. Okay, and then it just says on page 17/18, depending on which version you look at, it just says there was a cross out that resulted in the sentence, under these conditions, Albany could experience hotter and significantly drier, period. Might just want to, so it was originally hotter and significantly drier conditions in Palos Verdes estates on the coast near Los Angeles would be more like the hotter and significantly drier conditions, and then just kind of ends with a period, so might want to, exactly. And then, so on page 20, it says about partnerships. Just gotta find what accomplished or in progress. Okay, this would be page 20 of the marked up version. So, successful CAP programs have included commercial and residential energy efficiency partnerships. I think that we could be more specific just in this sentence about what those partnerships include. My first thought is EBCE, but when I scroll down, I see there's a lot more. So if EBCE is the main one, then it would be good to mention that. But, I mean, if it's a large number, then maybe just keep it as is, but I think
Sorry, what page are you on?
Oh,
Page
sorry.
20?
Is it this one? Page 20. Successful CAP programs have included commercial and residential energy efficiency partnerships. Paragraph 2 under progress to date. Yeah. Yep. Successful CAP programs have included, yes, that one. I just think it would be a good idea to include like a specific like EBCE where we took most of Albany residential energy off of carbon. So I think that might be nice to put in there. Yeah, those are my comments.
Okay. Well, I have a few here. I'll try to get them quickly. I wanted to address some of the comments from the public that were here. So I totally agree with Preston. I think we need to match the plan with California's updated goals of 100% at 2045. And that kind of brings me a bit to the graph the graphic on page 36, which is very stylized, and what I was hoping would be a bit more informative and not as sort of, generic and uniform. And there are a couple things with it that kind of bother me. One's been touched on already, that we sort of compartmentalize these events that are going to happen or these goals or actions by just these critical dates. And really, I think what needs to happen in this state is, first of all, we are way behind on the curve. The climate scientists are now saying we have 10 years to really do this globally. So if we can't even do it locally in 35 years, it's too far out there, and we need to tighten it up. So I think that's the message we've really been getting, and it would be a mistake to make our next climate action plan not change from the prior one, which did say 2050, which was the good knowledge at that time, but I think we should at least move the 100% up to 2045. But it's not going to be a straight line, because the way it's really going to work is you're going to try really hard at first and get a lot of things happening, as some people mentioned, with some good wins like getting rid of gas and new construction and things like that, so that you get a steeper you get a steeper deceleration at the end, and then it'll be at the end you'll get these really hard, very hard to do things like converting existing and whatever, and those will take longer, but hopefully will be handled along lines. So what I find missing in this is that we're missing kind of a milestones and goals and targets along here. They're just these big lump targets, 60% reduction by here. And look, these colors all add up to that. The other thing that's a problem with this is the green color is adding up into it too, which is something we don't even track. The carbon-free economy savings do not contribute unless we're going to start measuring them. That's a big, big deal if all of a sudden carbon neutrality is going to include what we consume. So right now, the metrics we're measuring are just what we generate, from transportation, buildings, that kind of thing, waste. But now we've thrown in what we consume. So I don't think this is really showing what the plan's achieving correctly. And I don't think it shows in enough detail, and I don't think it shows the milestones and the phasing in
Nick,
enough detail.
Did you see on the right-hand side, there are goals there? Have you seen those?
Yeah, I can see it's saying 25 production and miles traveled by, and all of this,
We used a spreadsheet tool that the consultants had developed to determine where we needed to be in order to get to carbon neutrality, which is where these numbers came from. So we didn't just pull them out of a hat.
Yeah, but you came up with these very straight lines of how it's all going to go.
That's just a graphic.
Right, well, that's what I'm saying. I see just a graphic that's pretty pictures and is not really identifying a plan of what we need to hit when. And I think this could be made into that and a little more clear. And then I don't understand how carbon-free economy savings contribute to coming to carbon neutral because of what Eric brought up about how that's defined. Is it now defined as including our consumptive carbon footprint?
Carbon-free economy also includes waste, which is a sliver of our...
Well, waste certainly doesn't make up this much of what we're doing. And again, I'm reading this, again, it isn't representing what I think people are going to want to see, which are the milestones and what needs to happen the most when. And I think it touches on some of the questions people are bringing up, that we need to do some of these things sooner rather than later, and just to divide them up nice and evenly and put them at these points that are, 15 years out, 35 years out, doesn't show that it's really been thought through all the way in my mind. So I think we need to move up deadlines, and we need to stress the urgency. We need to move rapidly on the most beneficial and ordinanceable items now. We need to make hard decisions now. And what's good about doing it now and earlier is because then you can phase in the ordinances and the pain gradually. When I looked through the public comments, what I really saw were people were very interested in incentives, and they were very concerned about the one-time cost of when someone says, you need to bring your whole house up to full electrical now. But no, it's a phased thing. So we need to have that phasing as part of the plan. And the phasing needs to also include, if you're going to have incentives, then you have to have something that's feeding those incentives. The city doesn't have a lot of, everyone's in the public comments saying, well, will the city reduce my taxes? Will the city give me back property tax? Well, I don't think the city is going to give up their revenue stream to just do these incentives. So that begs the issue of having a whole financial plan of how do we run this plan. What's it going to cost? How are we going to cover these costs? What are the incentives going to be? Can we have taxes or fines or fees, some kind of stick that ramp up? One thing I thought of, which will be super unpopular and people will fight like crazy, is a parking ordinance where you get a permit, and your permit's free for the first year, and then it's $10 for gas-powered vehicles and free for electric vehicles. Then it goes up to $20 and $100 and $600 for gas-powered. So, I mean, you phase it in so that the stick encourages people, and those that don't, well, they may move out Albany. There'll be plenty of people that want to move in. So again, these are strategies that I don't see at all in here, and implementation is kind of a, it's referenced to, but it isn't really identified of how the implementation path goes. I'm not done. So let me just finish up. So since there was a lot of interest in how government's going to help incentivize this, I think we need to have that in the plan. I'm sorry.
Just briefly, I mean, yeah, you're trying to connect incentives with like disincentives. So disincentive for
Right.
having a gas-powered vehicle would be the parking permit. And then I think that one issue people have with electric vehicles is that a lot of the infrastructure isn't in place to have one. So if a parking permit system was put in place, or even if it wasn't, I mean, of course, a good thing to do is improve our electric vehicle infrastructure in Albany.
Yeah, well, and again,
Yeah.
everybody's going to say,
Charging
show me the money.
stations and- yeah.
And so the idea is that you will need to generate revenue. You could even charge a carbon tax on everybody that's hooked up to gas in Albany. I mean, there are all sorts of things we can do. It's going to be hugely unpopular, going to take a lot of political will. But we have a little bit of time to phase these things in, and I think that's the crux of making the implementation work. The crux is that we will do some very unpleasant items to force people to make the right decisions, because they're not going to do it on their own, because they haven't, and we've known about this for years. And in order to move that in, you need to generate revenue in order to support the programs that will make this happen. So I thought there would be a bit more detail on the implementation. I didn't see that. So I also want to underscore also there was a lot of interest in the public comments about the schools and why aren't you reaching out to the schools? And I think in Albany we need to also remember that the schools are the primary reason why a lot of people are here. And it's a lot of the community involvement aspect of what Albany people do is they're involved with the schools. So I realize that they're separate bureaucracies and they govern independently of one another. And we're not saying that they need to now take jurisdiction over one or anything, but there needs to be some sort of specific partnering going on where there's educational opportunities, there's infrastructure improvement opportunities and stuff that then are pointed out. And I think Tom pointed out some of them. Why aren't we saying the school? And by saying school, we don't mean we're going to tell the school district what to do or take over some domain over them. It's just we need the partnering with them, I think, will leverage a lot. We'll get a lot of information out to people in Albany, and we'll bring a lot of Albany people along to see that the district is involved too. And then let's see, full-time staff, that's great. None of this is going to happen unless we have someone really working on it full-time. I know all you guys work really hard, and I appreciate what you've done in the past, but this is a new level of intensity that is going to happen, and it's going to need someone really bird-dogging it along on a daily basis, especially in just informing everybody what's happening and keeping people focused on what needs to happen. So I think all of that was good. I also wanted to underscore the tree master plan should include, again, this is one of the things we need to know the results of that. Just creating a plan. Our plan shouldn't be to create plans and make suggestions. It should have actions and then targets. And so there should be a target for what kind of density of urban forest do we want? What type of trees? Where are they going to be located? Where's the big opportunities? So if that comes out of the plan, out of that plan should also come milestones for doing that. Otherwise, I think we're a lot further along. I was glad to see some of the changes. I'd like to see more focus on the short term and really action plan on how we're going to do that, because what will happen in the next 5 years are going to be critical. We'll probably get to a point where we'll do a reassessment, I imagine, at some point, see where we are. And it'll get tweaked again. So at this point, the first 5 years are going to be the most critical. Okay.
Right. So appreciated all the comments and the public comments. So I have a number of comments that I sent to Claire and Lizzie earlier today, so I won't go through all those, just in the interest of time. Some of them are just wordsmithing. So for example, the term activate transportation to me thinks like we should go for it. We should all get into our cars and get, activated in our transportation. So I'm not a big proponent of that language, but that's kind of a fine tuning. And active transportation, I understand. So, a few letters make a big difference, apparently. But at any rate, the big items that I wanted to highlight, the number one thing is that I think the goals need to be more aggressive than the state goals, and that there's definitely a precedent for that in our CAP 1.0 and also in our carbon neutrality goal for 2050 and our 60% reduction in 2035. So Albany is a very walkable community with a mild climate and very forward-thinking in general. So I think, we need to be more aggressive. And obviously, it's going to be very difficult, but I don't think we should just keep the same target as the state. And I think we discussed that last time or even 2 times ago. So, I don't know if that suggestion made it into the consultant, but I'd like to just reiterate that proposal to say we should set a target of net zero carbon by 2040, and that really implies 90% by 2035. So just underscoring what Nick said about a sharp reduction, and then kind of we're going to get the last 10%.
So Max, the staff memo that went along to the city council had a table in it that shows the Climate Action Committee's proposal that does say 2035, 90%, 2040 carbon neutral. Okay. So that's the thing that, and I asked about that too, and that okay. The answer was that city council needs to accept that before it can go into the plan.
Okay. Yeah, I missed that, sorry. But I'd just like to reemphasize that. Let's see, what else did I want to just highlight? I guess one other comment just on the wedge plot. I agree with the remarks that Nick just made about this last wedge as being very kind of conceptual, but it's not really usable if we're to look at this in 5 years or 10 years, because again, as Nick rightly pointed out, there's really no metric for that carbon economy, low economy wedge. But the other question I would have is, how do we get to carbon zero if the targets are like at 98% for vehicle electrification and 98% for building electrification? So, that is not getting us to a carbon zero goal. The goals need to be 100%, or we're saying that we're going to achieve carbon negative emissions, which I don't really see clearly stated. Of course, we can say we can plant trees and green Albany, et cetera, but I don't think that will offset the numbers there.
So, like Claire mentioned, our consultants made us kind of like a fun, a little bit intimidating calculator where we can plug in like what percentages we need to reach for each of these like main goals in order to reach carbon neutrality. And then it shows us in number of trees what we would have to plant to offset it. And obviously it's many trees, and we're also going into it like our carbon neutrality definition says, assuming that when we really need to look at carbon negative, like sequestering carbon, we're hoping that there will be technology out there to help us as well, not just relying on those trees. But that's how we calculated these numbers.
That's helpful. I'm not sure I found that in the report. I may have missed it, but I think that's good information to include. Okay, just in terms of the goals, maybe I'll just touch on one of them for the transportation, goal 2 on page 40. So this goal is about developing a plan for greater electric car or electric charging infrastructure. And I think while that's important, I think it's really missing the PEV purchase aspect of overcoming the barriers for purchasing an EV car, which is like it's higher, there can be higher first cost, although that cost is coming down. So again, I think this is a comment that maybe Eric had raised last time, but it doesn't look very changed, and it doesn't look like there's anything new which is addressing this. So that's just another repeat of a comment. So I also just looked, sorry, yeah. I don't know if you're going to say anything. Yeah, okay. I also looked at the comments, not all of them, but many of the public comments, and I just wanted to highlight a few points which I thought were common threads or maybe very good points. So one point was critical path items. I think there was a comment about like what is the baseline that we need to achieve? What are the types of things that we need to put in place to ready so that we're not locking things in that would make it much harder to electrify. So things like maybe that's something like electric panels or basic readiness for EV charging. So that was an interesting and I think a valid comment. Another comment, maybe this was the same commenter, but there was several mentions of passive homes. So I was just thinking in the context of a longer time frame action plan where we're not just looking at 2022, 23, but maybe it's 2028 or 29, that it's something that we should consider as something that could be desirable. That is to say, passive homes for new construction, say, for energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, resiliency, in that it can provide passive survivability in the sense that you don't necessarily need power. You could last, through a heat wave with greater survival, just with more comfort. So that was an interesting one. I don't know about the costs though, but I've heard anecdotally that the cost can be competitive on a life cycle basis. I was a little bit concerned, or I am a little bit concerned about the general tenor of comments tonight about not that we should electrify, I agree with that, in conjunction with a zero carbon electricity system, but just the notion that it's highly affordable or it's very cost competitive in the sense that I think it really depends on what we're talking about. So water heating, I think we can say is much more expensive today. If you're going to put in a heat pump water heater, if you're going to put in a heat pump, air source heat pump, it will also be more expensive than putting in, say, a furnace. So I think it can depend on the situation. If you're saying that an air source heat pump is going to replace or serve both as a furnace or a heater in the winter and an air conditioner in the summer, that can be a different story. But today, we don't have really an air-conditioned, a climate which has a lot of cooling demand, so that makes it less economic for heat pumps. That may change, of course. But the other key factor to keep in mind is that our electricity rates have gone up 31% in the last 10 years. If you look at the peak natural gas price in 2008, it's lower than it was, it's lower than our natural gas is basically at the same level, the prices are at the same level as they were in 2008, which was a relative maximum. So it's not to say that gas rates aren't going to go up, they will, but PG&E is filing for large rate increases because of wildfire liabilities. They're on the hook for $11 billion. Those rates may pass through to customers. PG&E has also warned that there will be public service power shutoffs. So that is another concern. It's just to say, in the worst case, there could be a perfect storm of people just saying, no, this isn't going to work for me. My rates are going up. It's more expensive to install and a first cost, concerns about life cycle costs. So I just don't think it's a good idea to say, this is going to be super affordable. We can all do it today. I think there's going to be a lot of potential pain, and it could be a very difficult road ahead. Especially for existing buildings. So I just want to put a caveat out there to just saying that it's going to be very cost competitive. Yes.
So the East Bay Clean Energy, doesn't that ameliorate some of what's going on with PG&E? Because it's
I think
maybe additional transportation charges.
I'm not sure if the rates are going to diverge that much. Lizzie, do you want to weigh in there?
There's going to be, the transmission charges are probably where the cost for maintenance of these systems comes from, in which case anyone's paying those because PG&E is responsible for those transmission and distribution systems.
But I mean, are the rates going to be very divergent between EBC and PG&E?
Potentially for electricity, but I'm not sure how the wildfire liability plays into the electricity rate itself, is what I'm saying. There's other items on the bill that will still be charged to everyone.
I see. Okay. All right. So I may be completely wrong there. So at any rate, I just think that, you know, from the rate standpoint and the equipment and life cycle cost standpoint, it's you know, just something to really be aware of and to be sensitive to. And also I think that low-cost measures could be looked at more carefully, such as passive measures like solar films and also low-cost measures such as ceiling fans as opposed to putting in air conditioning. So I think those are partly in there, but not really fully captured in terms of heat resiliency in the resiliency section. So those were some of the key points that I wanted to highlight.
I think Max also brings up a really good point, which I saw in the comments too, is there's real trepidation because it's unusual, you know, people are pretty wedded to gas, especially for cooking and things. It would be really good if we had something in there about a training program or about how the information will be made available to show the cost-benefit analyses. And that was also requested, I think, by one of the public commenters. And you know, it would even be nice if the plan did have some sort of graphic that said, here is sort of the typical cost, and it could be if you did this over this many years with, you know, these assume. I realize everybody's going to be different, but if you could just take one sort of case example of just a typical home, and how it would go from being what everybody has now to what would be ideal, costs, over time, benefits, and the whole thing. Because one thing I think people are going to find actually, and what makes it, what it sort of convinced me was that when you go to all electric, it does help to have solar too, because then your solar system will pay off in a certain number of years, and then you're defraying all this electrical use, especially when you start driving an electric vehicle and you put all that on there. So these are questions that people really have before they're going to accept that's the road we want to go down. And it was very illuminating to read through these comments and hear people say that. So anyway.
Great. Thanks very much for all the comments. How do we close this? We're running up
I think
against
that's it. I don't think you need to vote on anything.
Okay.
I had one.
Oh, you may want to extend the time.
Yeah, we're running up against the end of the.
But I have a really fast question. This issue of the zero carbon by 2050 versus 2045 or 2040, and what we've said, do we need to make a motion to pass that recommendation on to the council?
That we've already passed it on to the council.
Oh, okay.
So.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just that they didn't have time to talk about it.
Okay.
So they'll talk about it on October 7th. Yeah, do you want to, you can have people make a motion to extend the time to discuss Green Building Subcommittee, or?
Yeah, or do we want to move that to the next? Is the green?
Up to you if you have an update.
We have an update.
You met with Jeff?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can give a brief update. We did meet with Jeff, so.
Let's do another 10 minutes.
All right, so should we do, 10 minutes for the? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So, so I think the update was that we learned that the Berkeley ordinance to have all new construction, that passed to have all electric construction and no natural gas passed in July, and that there are no legal challenges. So that was something which was good to hear, and that the ordinance applies to the planning phase and is not a change to the codes and standards. So we think that this could be fast-tracked as a recommendation to council for Albany to pass, really following and drafting on the Berkeley plan. So hopefully it can be quick to do that. We did have some questions with Jeff on following up on better understanding the codes and standards. And for example, it is important to think about the retrofits that are going in terms of the energy efficiency levels that are in retrofits. So at what point are minimum standards triggered for retrofits? And so we thought it would be valuable for our subcommittee to meet with a building and codes expert, maybe Ian McLeod, if you're willing to meet with us, just to discuss some of the niceties of the building code, both for new construction but also retrofits. And then finally, we were also talking about natural gas in terms of what it would take to ban new equipment, working backwards from, say, a 2045 or 2040 zero carbon target, given that natural gas appliances will last maybe 15 to 20 years in the extreme case. So that would be working backwards a ban on natural gas by, say, 2030. And I think that's partly alluded to in the climate, in the CAP. So we were just having some discussions about what that would mean, and it might be very hard to enforce because how would you enforce it? And people could go outside of Albany, but as a measure or as a, a target or a goal for the city, we thought that it could have some advantages for outreach and education, but also just as a strong signal of the commitment that Albany has on reaching a zero carbon goal in a timely fashion. So it was just subject to further discussion. For example, we weren't sure if such a ban, a nominal ban, would conflict with federal preemption because they're building their appliance standards which govern, water heating and space heating and air conditioning and such. So, but anyways, those are some of the discussion items. And I think separately, just based on what Preston commented on earlier about the progress in the restructured UUT, and also based on what Preston sent out on the carbon zero mailing list, I think that would be something that would be good to bring back to the subcommittee. So maybe in our next meeting to get an update on that and to see how we can move forward within Albany.
Thanks. So the Berkeley natural gas ban on new buildings, is that something that it feels like that's a very likely topic for us to take and make a recommendation to City Council to really kickstart that. Would we be able to bring that as an agenda item next climate action meeting? Would we have enough?
We were going to try and set up a meeting in between and meet with Ian and Jeff and the three of us.
Would that give you enough time to, if we make an agenda item for next month's climate action committee meeting, to discuss and form a proposal?
The idea was that Jeff would come with an actual ordinance based on modifying what Berkeley did.
Right. It feels like there's like Ian said, there's a template right there, so, yeah. Should we make that an agenda item for next meeting? Good, great, okay.
That could just, I don't know if we have public comment at the end.
Yeah.
Sure, I think.
We still.
Actually, we do after each thing.
We gave ourselves 10 minutes, right?
Okay, yeah.
Good. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's on the agenda.
Yeah, Ian McLeod. I'd like to, this gas thing, really encouraging to know it's moving forward. That's great. I'd be happy to meet with subcommittee or any of you at any time. And I'd be happy to meet with Jeff, too. But there's another subject related to green building, and our current green building sustainability standards are incredibly useless, okay? It says, fill out a checklist. LEED or green point rated. It just says, fill out a checklist. That's basically nothing. So we have no green building sustainability standards in our planning code at the moment. And when I brought this up at the Planning Commission meeting as to why don't we adopt something more, they said, that's not us, that's Climate Action Committee. So I think we need to, maybe tonight is not the night to enumerate all the different options, but you mentioned Passive House. It's an actual certification program that I would recommend for multifamily housing. If LEED is something that we would be interested in doing, we've got to set a level. And I think we should be setting a high level for commercial buildings and other standards for residential buildings. But basically, there's currently nothing on the books. It says, fill out a checklist, standards to be set by council. And as far as I know, council has not set any standard or any target or minimum, so maybe you know of some, but we've got to do better. So I don't know how to get there, but it's your responsibility, apparently, to formulate these things and not planning commission. So I feel like my hands are tied. So I don't know how we go forward, but I would love to see something. You know, we just had a townhouse project come to us, multifamily, 9 units. It would be very easy to adopt a passive house certification requirement, and it provides resilience, lowers energy use, filtered air, shelter during fire, smoke events, insulation, higher insulation values, resilience in heat events. I mean, it just makes a lot of sense. And for multifamily, fairly compact designs, it's not that hard and it's relatively cost effective. You insulate, you lower your equipment costs, you take your electrical equipment costs and you shrink them because you're not using as much electricity. I could comment on other things I heard tonight, but I probably should give you back your time. So thank you very much.
Thanks. It sounds like the Green Building Subcommittee's got a nice little set of things. That's great.
This is the topic that we're trying to address.
All right.
Yeah, and that has been going on for a while, and some of it was we were waiting on Jeff Bond to sort of bring together various city groups, and we were going to meet, and then it got stalled, and now it's starting up again. So we're working on it, but it's just has taken a bit.
Right.
But I think we're aware of that, yeah.
So we'll close on that topic. Okay. So how do we end? Do I make a motion to
Future agenda
adjourn?
item.
Say adjourn.
One more item, future agenda.
Future agenda items.
I have the future agenda item for the discussion of updates / natural gas ordinance. And we can refine that language later, but.
You know, I had one final comment. I mean, we had someone who came and attended, and we also got email on this issue of the leaf blower thing. And I think it would be good to at least continue on. There is an aspect, I know I looked at this, and actually the mayor suggested this particular item too, is there are grants that are available through East Bay Community Energy, and one of the things we were thinking of going for with them was helping gardeners change over from gas-powered equipment to electric equipment. It's a bit more expensive, and a lot of guys that do this kind of work, they just buy the cheapest thing they can get, which is these unregulated gas-powered blowers and weed whackers and mowers. And so it would be helpful maybe to have something that in the cap that talked about phasing gardening equipment or this sort of two-stroke motor type equipment to electric also.
Well, I was kind of thinking that, I mean, this is such a tactical thing we could tackle. I don't know how far out do we set agenda items, but we could, we could put the green building code on the November and the leaf blower or on November as well in order to give ourselves some time to prepare for that. But
What I would recommend is that we ask staff to give us an update about what other cities have been able to do in this regard and what legal authority we have to address this, that if anything's changed in the last 5 years.
about the leaf blower?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we could, based on that,
That's a good idea.
report and discuss.
It's a great idea.
Next steps.
Yeah, no, I like that.
Good. That sounds good. Is that okay, staff? All right. Anything else? Make a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Second.
I'll agree with that. I'll agree with that.